Getting Even is the fourth episode of the third season of Everybody Loves Raymond. This is directed by Steve Zuckerman, and as always, there will be spoilers from now as I go through the episode. Really enjoyed this one. Some great quotes, particularly towards the end. And I think it's very thought-provoking as well with how Ray responded to everything. It starts... It's not that funny. It starts off with Ray coming home and Debra saying immediately, "Want to see my jewellery box?" Which is not something I ever would have thought could have sounded like a euphemism, but it absolutely did. Ray thought the same thing as well, but it turns out that Debra is actually referring to a jewellery box that she's made, because this is for an upcoming auction. She's actually on the organising committee for the auction to raise money for school playground equipment, and she's made this jewellery box. We then get to the auction immediately. Next scene, Frank and Marie are there, which is really sweet, and Frank is bidding on everything to try and raise the prices up, and Ray is reluctantly the auctioneer. And they are starting off by auctioning this jewellery box, and nobody bids. And then quite quickly, as Debra is demonstrating how the jewellery box opens, it begins to fall apart in her hands. And Ray kind of makes a joke out of this and kind of escalates it, and the audience start laughing and really responding to him, and he's really lapping it up, and he was very quick-witted. Debra, however, wasn't happy. The next scene, it is bedtime, and Debra's really annoyed at Ray. Now, I'll be fair to Ray. I don't think Ray responded in a way that was unacceptable. In fact, I think he took a potentially embarrassing situation and made it bearable. Because the alternative is that he just stood there and waited for somebody to bid, or very sheepishly just said no more jewellery box. He turned it into something that was quite funny. And I honestly feel like Debra wasn't considering what the alternative would have been. It wasn't Ray's fault that the jewellery box fell apart, and I think he was making the best out of an awkward situation, but she was too frustrated to see this, and she calls Ray a laugh whore, which I thought was very amusing. And Ray said it wouldn't have bothered him if the tables were turned. He wouldn't have been bothered by it, and Debra kind of hints that she'll get him back. If he's not going to be bothered about it, she can do something to him and it won't affect him. And then we have the following morning, and Debra comes downstairs and apologises. She says she did think about it. She took herself too seriously at the auction, and it's very unclear at this point whether she's being sincere or if she's kind of lulling Ray into a false sense of security. But immediately Ray is on guard. Ali asks for some juice for breakfast, and Ray wants some juice, but Ali has the last of it, so Debra suggests Ray can have a soda with his breakfast. I don't know why water wasn't an option, but apparently if there's no juice, the next best thing is soda. And Ray immediately thinks that Debra must have shaken up the soda can, and he doesn't want to touch it. And then Marie and Frank come over. We found out that Frank actually won some of the stuff he bid on, even though he wasn't meant to, he didn't want to, and he won a ride on a canoe, which is quite sweet. And a little while later, Ray comes in with Robert. This is much later, and Ray is still paranoid about what Debra might or might not be doing. And he tells Robert to go and ask Debra if she's going to try and get him. And he does, and Debra tells Robert no. And we see, while Robert's speaking with Debra, we see Ray shaking up Debra's soda can. And I feel like it was kind of obvious what was going to happen here, but it was still entertaining nevertheless, because Robert then goes into the fridge, takes the soda can, and it explodes, sprays everywhere in his face. And then, after some more panicking, we have this brilliant scene, and I loved how it played out. It's the penultimate scene. It's in the bedroom, and Ray is still telling Debra, "You're going to get me, I know it." And Debra's adamant that she's not, and by this time, I truly believed, 90% believed, that she wasn't going to get him. But Ray was pretty much 100% certain. He even cancelled his golfing trip because he thought she'd get him back where it would hurt, because he cares a lot about his golfing. And he tells her, "I've cancelled it." And then he says, and I love this exchange, he says, "I'm anxious." And Debra tells him, "Don't be anxious." And Ray replies, "Don't tell me how to feel." And Debra responds, "And there it is." And this is because in the beginning, after the auction, Debra was feeling angry and frustrated, and Ray told her, "Don't feel like that." And his intentions were in the right place. He means, don't worry, nobody else thought it was embarrassing, you don't need to feel like this. But Debra was annoyed that he was telling her how to feel. And there we have the tables turned, and now Ray gets to realise what it's like when you're feeling a certain way and somebody tells you to not feel that way. And I thought that was pretty great. And then he realises that Debra isn't trying to get him. And he says, and I quote, "You let me do this to myself." Now, the whole "you let me" bit, I don't have any thoughts on, but the whole doing it to himself is so thought-provoking. And if you have anxiety, you will surely agree that often the anxiety is self-created. I mean, anxiety does come from within. That's kind of the whole point of anxiety, is that it's internal fears and panicking. And when Ray realised that he was feeling the way he was feeling because of how he allowed his own thoughts to run rather than thinking rationally about the situation and allowing his anxiety to grow and grow, he realised that he'd caused problems for himself. And that is true about anxiety. If you have anxiety, it's not uncommon for the anxiety to cause more anxiety, which then causes more anxiety. And it just kind of escalates. And that's exactly what happened with Ray. It started off as him being a little bit nervous when he went to bed, to it escalating the more and more it went on, and the longer it went on without him doing anything to help quell those emotions. And Debra further solidifies this by saying, "Nothing I could think of could screw you up more than what's already in that beautiful mind." And I think that that's just so accurate for so many people, myself included, on so many levels. We are often our own worst enemies. And that's exactly what Ray was in this scenario. And I think he learned a lot in those few moments in that brief exchange with Debra. I rather liked it. And then we end with Frank and Marie. And Marie is in the canoe. She's looking forward to enjoying this romantic, she thinks, relaxing ride on the boat. And then the boat drifts off. Frank has given her a little nudge, and he's there with, I think, fried chicken, and she's drifting out to the sea, never to be seen again. Might be slightly dramatic, but that's clearly what it felt like based on her facial expressions. It's a great episode, really thought-provoking, funny at times, beautifully played out. If you can relate to Ray, as I know many of us can, I think there are some really strong takeaways here. But even if not, still a really enjoyable episode. Getting Even is pretty great.